Chapter 1. The Mysterious Ring. It was a chilly evening when Emma heard the front door creak open. She looked up to see her husband David, stumbling inside, clearly drunk. The smell of whiskey filled the room as he dropped his keys on the table and muttered a tired, "I'm home," before collapsing onto the couch. Emma sighed, covering him with a blanket and gently taking off his coat. As she moved to hang it up, her hand brushed against something hard in the pocket. Curious, Emma reached in and pulled out a small velvet box. Her heart skipped a beat. She opened it to reveal a beautiful ring, a unique design with intricate details that shimmered even in the dim light. Confusion washed over her. Why would David have this? They hadn't spoken about rings, anniversaries, or anything of the sort lately. When David woke up the next morning, Emma confronted him. She held up the ring and asked, "What is this, David?" Still groggy, he rubbed his temples and squinted at the shiny piece of jewelry. "Oh, that," he said with a dismissive wave. "It's just a company reward. We got it at a recent work event. You know, perks of working for a jewelry firm." He forced a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The explanation seemed reasonable at first. After all, David did work for a prestigious jewelry company. But something about his tone, the way he avoided eye contact, made Emma's stomach twist. She knew her husband well enough to sense when he wasn't telling the full truth. "Why didn't you mention it before?" she pressed. "You usually tell me about work events." David shrugged, too casually. "I guess it slipped my mind," he said, before retreating to the shower. As the water ran, Emma stood alone in the living room, staring at the ring. She traced the delicate patterns with her fingers, feeling a strange mix of doubt and dread. It was unlike any company gift she had ever seen. Too personal, too intimate. Over the next few days, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. David had become more distant lately, coming home late, avoiding conversations, and seeming lost in his own thoughts. This wasn't like the man she had married. The ring felt like a symbol of something hidden, something he wasn't sharing. Chapter 2. Lingering Doubts. One day, during a conversation with an acquaintance who worked at the same company as David, Emma's suspicions took a sharper turn. The colleague mentioned casually, "Oh, Linda has really made her mark as David's new secretary. She's been there for about 3 months now." Emma's stomach clenched. Linda, a new secretary. The fact that David had never mentioned her, not even in passing, made Emma's heart race. Why would he keep this a secret? Fueled by doubt and curiosity, Emma decided to look for any clues on social media. She opened David's Facebook account, hoping to find some trace of Linda, a friend request, a tag, a comment, anything. She scrolled through his posts and photos, searching for signs of connection. To her surprise, there was nothing. No new friend requests, no comments from anyone unfamiliar, no photos that hinted at any closeness with a new colleague. Everything looked perfectly normal. Too normal. The absence of evidence made her even more uneasy. It didn't make sense. If Linda had been working with David every day for months, why was there no trace of her? Emma felt a cold realization sink in. Either David was being exceptionally careful to hide his interactions with Linda, or something more deliberate was happening. Emma's thoughts spiraled. She remembered how David used to share everything with her, even the small details of his day. Now, there was a wall between them, and she didn't know why. Was it possible that this new secretary was part of the reason? Was she imagining things? Or was her intuition trying to warn her? Determined not to jump to conclusions, but unwilling to ignore the warning signs, Emma resolved to keep digging. She would find out what, if anything, was going on between David and Linda. The fear of the unknown gnawed at her, but so did the need to protect what was left of their marriage. One way or another, she would uncover the truth, even if it hurt. Chapter 3. Social Media Unveils the Truth. Emma's doubts about David were growing, and she needed someone to confide in. She called her best friend Mia, who came over as soon as she heard the urgency in Emma's voice. They sat down together, and Emma recounted everything. David's late nights, his distant behavior, and the mysterious ring. Mia listened intently, a serious look on her face. "I think there's more going on here," Mia said firmly. Have you checked his social media? Sometimes people slip up there. Emma nodded, but felt defeated. I've looked at his Facebook. There's nothing out of the ordinary. No tags, no comments, nothing suspicious. Mia leaned forward, determination flashing in her eyes. Let me check from my phone. Emma handed Mia David's profile name, and Mia quickly pulled it up on her phone. Together, they scrolled through his posts. At first, everything seemed normal. Photos of work events, friends, and general updates. But then Mia noticed something odd. Hold on, she said, pointing at the screen. There's a woman who likes almost every post. Emma leaned closer. What? Let me see. The name was unmistakable, Linda. Post after post, Linda's name appeared in the likes. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't noticed this when she checked David's account herself. Why didn't I see this? She whispered, a mix of confusion and dread washing over her. Mia looked at her gravely. I think she blocked you. That's why you couldn't see it. The realization hit Emma like a punch to the gut. Linda had deliberately made sure Emma couldn't see her presence. This was more than just a coincidence. It was a calculated move to keep her in the dark. Desperate for more answers, Emma asked Mia to check Linda's profile. As they scrolled through, they found a stream of photos showing a glamorous lifestyle, fancy dinners, luxury vacations, and expensive gifts. In many of the photos, she posed with a man whose face was either turned away from the camera or obscured by shadows. Chapter 4. Incontrovertible Evidence. Emma's fingers trembled as she scrolled through Linda's social media profile. Every new photo felt like a slap. There were more pictures of Linda and the mysterious man, fancy dinners, scenic trips, quiet moments that spoke volumes about intimacy. Emma's mind refused to quiet down. It felt like pieces of a puzzle she desperately didn't want to solve were falling into place. Suddenly, a photo stopped her cold. It was a close-up of two intertwined hands, each wearing matching rings. Linda had captioned it with the words, "With the one who holds my heart." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she zoomed in. The intricate design of the ring was unmistakable. It was the same one she had found hidden in David's coat pocket. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No, no, no." The phone slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Emma collapsed onto the couch, covering her face with trembling hands. The sobs came suddenly, violently, tears streaming down her cheeks like rain. She cried so hard that her body shook, gasping for air in between broken breaths. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, tearing her apart from the inside out. For hours, she couldn't stop the tears. The realization that her worst fears were true was suffocating. Mia, who had been sitting next to her, watched helplessly. She wrapped her arms around Emma, pulling her close. "Let it out," Mia whispered, her voice soft and steady. "You need to let it out." Emma clung to her friend as if she were the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. The tears kept coming, soaking Mia's shoulder, but Emma couldn't stop. Images of David, his smile, his touch, the life they had built together, flashed through her mind, tainted now by lies and secrets. The man she thought she knew had become a stranger. "I loved him," Emma choked out between sobs. "I trusted him, Mia. I trusted him with everything." Mia tightened her hold. "I know," she said softly. "I know." The minutes turned into hours, and still, the tears didn't stop. Emma's eyes were red and swollen, her voice raw from crying. Exhaustion began to settle in, dulling the sharp edge of her pain, but the ache in her chest remained. She finally pulled back, wiping her wet cheeks with the back of her hand. "How could he do this?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "How could he lie like this?" Mia met her gaze, determination hardening her own eyes. "You deserve answers, Emma. He can't keep hiding behind lies. We'll get to the bottom of this." Emma nodded, her breath shuddering. Anger flickered to life inside her, mingling with the sadness. "I need to know everything. I can't keep living like this." "You will," Mia promised. "And I'll be here every step of the way." Emma's tears slowed, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. she wasn't done. She would face David and uncover every last lie. Suddenly, an odd impulse surged through Emma. Her fingers moved swiftly, almost as if driven by their own will, and she typed a comment on the photo of the intertwined rings. "You two really do make a perfect pair." The words were steeped in pain and biting sarcasm. Without pausing to second-guess herself, she closed the app, feeling a mixture of bitter satisfaction and overwhelming heartbreak. Chapter 5. Ambiguous Explanations. Emma paced back and forth in the living room, her mind racing. She had spent hours replaying the images she had seen on Linda's profile and the memories of David's recent behavior. Tonight, she would get answers. When she heard the door creak open, her heart pounded. David stepped inside looking exhausted. He barely had time to set down his bag before Emma spoke. "We need to talk now," she said, her voice cold and firm. David's shoulders tensed. He looked at her, then at the phone clutched tightly in her hand. "What's this about?" he asked cautiously. "You know what it's about," Emma shot back, holding up the picture of the matching rings on Linda's profile. "Explain this." David's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, but said nothing. After a moment, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's not what it looks like, Emma," he began, his voice tired. "Linda and I both received those rings at that company celebration. It was a special event, a way to honor top performers. That's all it was." Emma crossed her arms, not believing a word. "You expect me to believe that? Why didn't you tell me? And why is she posting pictures with captions like, 'with the one who holds my heart'?" Her voice trembled with anger and hurt. "She's the boss's daughter," David replied, his tone pleading. "She likes attention. It wasn't my choice. I didn't want to upset anyone at work. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Emma repeated bitterly. "Everything about this feels wrong, David. You've been distant, cold. You forgot our anniversary. You barely speak to me anymore." David's eyes dropped to the floor. "I know," he admitted softly. "I've been under a lot of stress. The projects at work, the pressure from the boss. It's been overwhelming. I didn't mean to push you away." Emma shook her head. "You didn't just push me away. You lied to me. You hid things from me." David's expression grew tense, but he forced a smile. "Look, I messed up, okay? I should have been honest, but nothing happened between me and Linda. It was just work stuff." His words felt empty, like a poorly rehearsed line. Emma could see it, the slight twitch in his jaw, the way he avoided her gaze. Deep down, she knew he wasn't telling the full truth. But he continued, desperate to brush things aside. "I promise I'll do better. No more secrets. I'll be better for you." Emma stared at him, her heart heavy with disappointment. "You think you can fix this with empty promises?" she asked, her voice hollow. David stepped forward, reaching for her hand. "Just trust me, Emma. Things will get better. I'll make it right." Chapter 6. The Unannounced Visit. Emma's mind was far from at ease. David's weak explanations and hollow promises left her feeling more unsettled than ever. Deep down, she knew he was hiding something. She needed more than vague reassurances. She needed the truth. And there was one place where the truth might reveal itself: his office. The next morning, Emma decided to make a surprise visit. She packed a lunch for David, something she hadn't done in months. It felt strange, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. She wasn't going to sit by and let her marriage crumble without understanding why. She needed to see it for herself. As she arrived at David's office building, nerves twisted in her stomach. She walked through the revolving doors and approached the receptionist's desk. The young woman behind the desk glanced up and gave a polite smile that quickly turned into surprise. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked hesitantly. Emma nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I'm here to see David. I brought him lunch." The receptionist's smile faded slightly. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Nervousness, maybe? She paused before saying, "It's been a while since you've been here." Emma forced a smile, but inside, her heart sank. "Yes, I thought it was time for a surprise." The receptionist nodded and picked up the phone, her voice low as she spoke to someone on the other end. Emma waited, feeling the seconds stretch painfully. Finally, She was directed to David's floor. She stepped into the elevator, her heartbeat thundering in her chest. The door slid open, and Emma stepped into the familiar hallway. She had visited David's office before, back when things were better between them. Now, every step felt like walking into enemy territory. As she approached his office, she heard muffled voices and laughter. A woman's laughter. It was light, teasing, and far too familiar for Emma's comfort. Emma paused just outside the door, her breath catching. She pushed it open quietly and stepped inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. David was sitting on the edge of his desk, leaning slightly toward Linda, who was perched on the opposite end. Linda's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, and their faces were close. Too close. They were laughing about something, their voices low and intimate, as if they were sharing a private joke. The way Linda tilted her head back, exposing her neck as she laughed, was almost theatrical. She looked up at David with a glint in her eyes that made Emma's stomach twist. David's posture was relaxed, more relaxed than she had seen him in months. His smile, genuine and easy, was a stark contrast to the strained expressions he wore at home. He reached out and brushed an invisible piece of lint from Linda's sleeve, a gesture so casual and familiar that it spoke of countless moments like this one, moments Emma had never known about. For a moment, neither of them noticed her standing there, frozen in the doorway. Then Linda turned her head and saw Emma. The smile on her lips didn't disappear. It shifted into something else. A smug, almost triumphant curve. She didn't pull away or move her hand from David's shoulder. Instead, she leaned back slightly, as if inviting Emma to take in the scene. David noticed Linda's change in focus and turned. When his eyes met Emma's, the color drained from his face. He straightened immediately, stepping away from Linda as if putting distance between them would erase what had just happened. "Emma," he said, his voice strained and too bright. "What are you doing here?" Emma took a shaky step forward, the lunch bag still clenched tightly in her hands. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, her voice sharp but cracking with hurt. Linda didn't move. If anything, she seemed to relax more, crossing one leg over the other as she watched the exchange with mild interest. "No interruption at all," she said, her voice smooth and confident. "David and I were just catching up on some work." "Work," Emma repeated, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. She turned her gaze to David, who was now looking anywhere but at her. "It's not what it looks like," he said quickly, taking a step toward her. "We were just what, David?" Emma snapped, her eyes blazing. "Just laughing together? Just being this close?" Linda's lips curled slightly, as if she found the whole situation amusing. "I should give you two some privacy," she said, standing up slowly. She walked past Emma, her perfume lingering in the air, and paused briefly. "Nice to finally meet you." Chapter 7. The Collapse and Outburst. Emma stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest as Linda closed the door behind her. The image of David and Linda's intimate laughter, the touch of their hands, and their shared glances kept replaying in her mind. It felt like fire was coursing through her veins. Anger, pain, betrayal. She clenched her fists, the lunch bag she had brought for David now crumpled in her grip. "Emma, please, let me explain," David started, stepping toward her with his hands raised. He looked desperate, but there was no denying the guilt in his eyes. "Explain?" Emma spat out, her voice cracking with rage. "You want to explain? What exactly are you going to explain, David? That you've been lying to me, that you've been sneaking around with her?" She pointed toward the door where Linda had just exited. David opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked away, unable to meet her burning gaze. "Look at me," Emma screamed, her voice echoing through the office. Heads turned in the hallway as curious colleagues began to gather. The sound of footsteps and murmurs filled the air, but Emma didn't care. She had spent too long hiding her pain and suspicion. Now, it was all spilling out. "Everyone in this office must think I'm a fool," Emma continued, her voice shaking. "You think you can humiliate me like this and get away with it?" "Emma, please, lower your voice," David pleaded, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. We can talk about this privately." "No!" Emma shouted, stepping closer. "We're doing this right here, right now. You had no problem being private with her, didn't you?" David's face flushed with embarrassment, but he tried to reach for her hand. "It's not like that. I swear, don't touch me." Emma pulled away, her voice cracking with a mixture of fury and hurt. The people watching seemed to blur as her focus narrowed in on David. The man she once trusted had become a stranger. Just then, Linda reappeared, clearly drawn by the commotion. She stepped back into the room with a smirk playing on her lips, as if she was enjoying the show. That was the last straw for Emma. "You!" Emma shouted, turning her attention to Linda. Without thinking, she lunged forward, her fingers wrapping around the fabric of Linda's blouse. The smug smile vanished from Linda's face, replaced by shock. "You think you can just waltz in and take what's mine?" Linda struggled, but Emma's grip was tight. "Let go of me," Linda hissed, trying to maintain her composure, even as people gasped and whispered around them. "Not so confident now, are you?" Emma sneered, her voice cold. She didn't care who was watching. Months of pain and frustration had built up, and now it was pouring out of her. With one swift motion, Emma grabbed the lunch bag she had brought and dumped its contents over Linda and David. The food, rice, sauce, vegetables, splattered across their clothes, dripping onto the floor. Gasps and shocked exclamations echoed through the room. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. David stood there, covered in food, his expression a mix of disbelief and humiliation. "Emma!" he exclaimed, wiping sauce from his face. "What is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" Emma laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "You're asking me that? You did this, David, you and your little games." Linda, now covered in food, glared at Emma. "You're insane," she spat, trying to brush the mess from her blouse. Emma stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "I might be, but at least I'm not a liar. At least I didn't destroy someone else's life just for the thrill." Security personnel began to make their way through the crowd, sensing that things were spiraling out of control. One of them gently placed a hand on Emma's arm. "Ma'am, please, you need to leave." Emma shrugged off his hand but took a deep breath, realizing just how far things had gone. The rage still simmered inside her, but she didn't want to give them more of a spectacle. She turned to David one last time, her voice low but filled with pain. "We're done, David. I hope it was worth it." With that, she pushed past the crowd, her head held high, even as tears continued to fall. She could feel their eyes on her, some judging, some pitying, but she didn't care. Every step she took felt heavy, but it was also freeing. The lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, they wouldn't define her anymore. As the office doors closed behind her, Emma knew one thing. She had faced the truth, no matter how ugly it was. Chapter 8. Entangled Truths. Emma sat in the quiet of her living room, the events of the office confrontation replaying in her mind. The pain was raw, but beneath it, a burning need for answers remained. Later that night, David showed up at the door, looking worn and defeated. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Emma gestured for him to come inside. "Start talking," she said coldly, crossing her arms. "And this time, no lies." David nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I owe you the truth," he said quietly. He sat down, avoiding her eyes. "It started with a loan. A big one. I got into trouble and I couldn't find a way out. Linda, her father owns the company. She has influence, money. She offered to help." Emma stared at him coldly. "How much?" she asked. $200,000, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened in shock. 200,000? She repeated. "How did you even get yourself into that kind of debt?" David's hands clenched. "It was bad investments. I thought I could turn things around for us. Make more money. Get ahead. I trusted a so-called friend with a business deal that promised high returns. But it all collapsed. I lost everything, and the debts piled up fast." Emma shook her head, disbelief and anger battling inside her. "And you didn't think to tell me? You didn't think I had a right to know?" "I was ashamed," David admitted, his eyes haunted. "I didn't want you to see me as a failure. I thought I could fix it before it became this bad. but the debt collectors started calling, the threats. I was out of options. So what? Emma demanded. You just ran to Linda? She was your solution? It wasn't like that at first, David said, his voice low. I went to the company for an advance on my salary. That's when Linda found out. She offered to help, said she could make the debt go away. I was desperate, Emma. I didn't see any other way. Emma's fists tightened at her sides. So, you sold yourself to her. David's face contorted with pain. It wasn't supposed to be like that. She made it clear that there were conditions. She wanted control, wanted to keep me close. At first I thought I could handle it, pretend to go along, just until I could pay off the debt, but she used it against me. Every time I tried to pull away, she'd remind me of the power she had. If I defied her, she could ruin me, ruin us. And you just let her? Emma's voice rose, trembling with anger. You let her manipulate you while you shut me out? Did you ever think about what this was doing to me? David's eyes met hers, filled with regret. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I could keep you out of it, I'd find a way out eventually, but it spiraled out of control. I lied to you. I know that. I hurt you. I'm sorry. Sorry? Emma spat the word. You think an apology fixes this? You let her humiliate me. You let her twist you around while I was left in the dark. I know, David whispered, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I swear, Emma, I never loved her. It was never about that. I was trapped. Emma stared at him, her heart pounding. The weight of his words pressed down on her. She wanted to hate him completely, but she saw the broken man in front of her, the man who once meant everything to her, now reduced to this. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. What happens now, David? Do you expect me to just pretend this never happened? No, he said softly, his voice trembling. I don't expect anything. I just want you to know the truth. I'm done with Linda. I'm done with the lies. I want to fix things, if there's even a chance. Emma looked away, tears stinging her eyes. I don't know if there's anything left to fix. They sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy between them. David reached for her hand, but she pulled away. You can't just say you're done and expect it to be over, she whispered. It doesn't work like that. I know, he replied, his voice thick with despair. But I'm willing to try. I'll do whatever it takes. Emma stood, the pain etched into every line of her face. I need time, David. I need to figure out what this means for me, for us. Chapter 9. The Final Blow. The days following her conversation with David were difficult. Emma was exhausted, physically and emotionally. But beneath the layers of hurt, there was a small part of her that wanted to believe in his remorse. He had seemed genuinely broken, desperate to make things right. Though her trust was shattered, Emma found herself wondering if, maybe, over time, they could repair what was left. It was during one of these fragile moments, as she sat alone contemplating the pieces of her broken marriage, that her phone buzzed. The message was from Linda. We need to talk, face to face. Emma stared at the screen, her heart sinking. She knew no good could come from this, but curiosity and a need for closure pulled her in. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet. The cafe was quiet when Emma arrived. Linda was already there, seated at a corner table with a smug smile plastered across her face. She gestured for Emma to sit, her eyes glittering with a mix of triumph and something darker, something cruel. I'll get straight to the point, Linda began, her voice calm but cutting. She slid her phone across the table. I thought you'd want to see this. Emma hesitated before picking it up. Her hands trembled as she tapped the screen. What she saw made her stomach twist. Image after image flashed before her eyes. David and Linda together, their bodies intertwined. The photos were explicit, leaving no room for doubt. They weren't just close. They were lovers. Emma's face went pale. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Linda leaned back in her chair, enjoying every second of Emma's reaction. You see, she said softly, it wasn't just business. Emma slammed the phone down, her chest heaving. Why are you doing this? She demanded, her voice breaking. Haven't you done enough? Linda's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "I'm not done," she said, leaning in. "There's one more thing you should know." Emma stared at her, a sinking feeling settling in her gut. "What now?" she whispered. "I'm pregnant," Linda announced, her words slicing through the air like a knife. "With David's child." Time seemed to stop. Emma felt her world crumble around her. She wanted to scream, to run, to make it all go away, but she was frozen in place. Tears welled up in her eyes. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're lying." Linda shrugged, a cruel smirk tugging at her lips. "Believe what you want, but it's true. David knows. He's known for a while." Emma's vision blurred with tears. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she'd felt before. All of David's apologies, his promises to fix things, it had all been a lie. He had hidden this too. There was nothing left to salvage. No hope, no trust. "You think this means you've won?" Emma asked, her voice shaking but defiant. "You think destroying me makes you stronger?" Linda tilted her head, feigning innocence. "I don't need to win, Emma. I just wanted you to know the truth." Emma stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "Congratulations, then," she said bitterly. "You can have him. Whatever you think you've gained, you can have it." With that, Emma walked out of the cafe, her tears falling freely. The pain was unbearable, but as she stepped into the cold air, something inside her hardened. She had given everything to her marriage, to a man who had betrayed her in every possible way. But she wasn't broken, at least, not forever. Emma walked away from Linda, from the past, from everything that had once defined her, and with each step, she felt the weight begin to lift.